So here's a fun fact that I learned the other day. Godzilla is real. You see, one night after another full and productive day of Netflixing, I found myself engrossed in Jimmy Kimmel's Live Witness News section of the show, which is basically where Jimmy's crew interviews unsuspecting citizens about fun, false factoids. And in this particular show, Jimmy's crew was asking people about their thoughts on Godzilla, which, as the interviewer informed them, was Hollywood's glamorized version of the 1954 giant lizard attack on Tokyo. And surprisingly enough, some people went with it. So, being the devious person that I am, I decided to play a similar game with my friends. Maddie Gerard's Live Witness News. And, as it turns out, more than a few of my friends claim to be keeping up with the terrible outbreak of gynecomastia in Malaysia. However, here's the piece of crucial information I think most of my friends were missing. Gynecomastia is the medical term for man boobs. Threatening, but not deadly, or transferable. However, all of these situations lead to the same question. What's so hard about saying, I don't know? But we see it all the time. And people faking their way through questions that they obviously have no clue about or don't know how to answer. In everyday conversations, interviews with CEOs, presidential debates, Miss America pageants, and every single international extemp round I've ever competed in. It's so much easier to pretend. You see, in a generation that prides itself in certainty, we've come to see saying, I don't know, as an indication of naivete, contrary to the true courage that it takes to admit it. And as a result of this, we've come to veil ourselves behind dishonesty and falsehoods. Thus, it's time for us to take a look at our priority struggle between reputation and honesty, and what's led to our dependency on these white lies, and finally, what we can do to change our mentality, and embrace IDK. Our problem begins with the fact that we equivalate saying I don't know with weakness, and thus we've come to fear saying it. James Crowley, co-founder of the strategic and creative agency Common Ventures, writes, in an industry that's known for being current, it seems we're all petrified of admitting ignorance. And it's this kind of inaction, this passive dishonesty, that leaves companies like his disorganized. He recalls when he sat on in an extremely confusing meeting, so later, he went and asked some of the other participants what had happened. And, as it turns out, the people who had been vigorously nodding along had no idea what was going on. And the guy who had been furiously scribbling notes had successfully filled his notepad with unicorns. Later, Crawley discovered that the speaker had lost track 5 minutes in and started rambling. However, none of the participants spoke up about their confusion, and thus no one had a clear view of the next steps for the company. In the end, the meeting was basically entirely useless. Well, except for the guy with the unicorn heart. And it all comes back to the fact that no one was willing to admit that they needed a presentation deficient of confusing acronyms and Shakespearean wording. But in favor of upholding their image, they stayed silent, trying to appear as if they had it all together, but only to hurt their clients in the long run. Holmes' report found that out of 100,000 companies, there was an estimated total cost of $37 billion due to employee miscommunications and misunderstandings. The cost that I know would be cut if there wasn't such a negative stigma attached to admitting confusion. Leah Cohn writes in her book, I don't know, in praise of admitting ignorance, that the fakery has become normal in our social lives. We fall into a pattern of using deceit as a shield against feeling uncomfortable. She explains that we do this in order to appear credible, to feel accepted, and to build relationships. But what kind of reputation are we building? What kind of relationships are we creating, and what kind of precedent are we setting? If the foundation of it all is built off of false proclamations and passive deceit, instead we're losing the values of authenticity and honesty that are necessities in our confused world. Okay, so now that we're about a third of the way through the speech, is anyone confused? Does anyone have any questions? Does anyone not know what's going on? No? Nobody? Absolutely no one. Solid. Well, I guess that leads us to the reasons behind our obsession with certainty. I remember one of the first essays that I wrote. It was a pretty quality essay for a 7th grader, but my problem was that I filled the essay with phrases like, I think, and in my opinion. And apparently having those in an essay is like a death sentence, right along with text lingo and nicknaming Shakespeare, Shakespeazy. However, Tim Creeder believes that omitting these phrases is damaging the mentality of our generation. In his New York Times article, The Power of I Don't Know, he explains that in middle and high school, we're taught to make our arguments as succinct and cogent as possible, omitting qualifications like, in my opinion. But what this conveys to young minds is that in order for their opinion to be valid, they have to be 100% certain. At this impressionable age, we're marking uncertainty as a quality of the weak and unsuccessful. And when kids are afraid to be uncertain, it's harder and harder for them to find the middle ground of inquiry, experimentation, and failure. It's like when adults make up answers to children's unanswerable questions. And saying yes is easier than saying I don't know. And our fear of our lack of knowledge supersedes our values of transparency. So, how are we going to fix this problem? In total 100% honesty, I don't know. However, we can begin to fix this problem when we recognize our chance to speak honestly, to say, I don't know, and to recognize these opportunities as learning experiences. Rebecca Campbell writes in her New York Times article, the surprisingly large cost of telling small lies, that she conducted an experiment with an investment pitch. She states that in her pitch, she was entirely transparent about the financial model and the budget. She said, I don't know, when she didn't know. It was the total truth. And in the end, she got the deal. Even though she laid out all of her mistakes and poor money choices, the investor claimed that he admired her transparency. Basically saying, when you're transparent, people notice. And when you pretend, people notice. And when you take the time to backtrack and admit that you need help, that you don't know, people will applaud. Because we live in a time where our world has become numb to the never-ending circle of white lies. The honest truth of ignorance. And it's become refreshing. Leah Cohen. You remember her, don't you? From The Problems, she wrote the book. No? No, you don't know? We're learning! Well, she recalls when she made her students pledge that in her classroom, they would own up to their limits without apology and be forthright about the knowledge that they lack. And honestly, I think that's a pledge that we all need to make, extending it to our work, our home, and our family life. Because I could stand here and apologize for all the things I don't know, all the things I pretend to know, all the things that I never bother to ask. I could especially apologize for the fact that I thought Paul McCartney was Jesse McCartney's brother until I was 10. But here's the thing. We all have our weak spots, our lack of knowledge. There's no reason to judge someone for their specific shortcomings. So, at the end of the day, there's no more reason to pretend. There's all the more reason for us to say, I don't know. So, in the end, my friends caught my scheming. After some poking around, they discovered that gynecomastia isn't an epidemic in Malaysia. It's more so in Japan. The sumo wrestlers. However, this could have been wrapped up much more quickly with a simple, I don't know. I mean, it's literally that simple. I don't know. Come on, say it with me. I don't know. Improvement. And sometimes that's all it takes. An interruption. A declaration. You can only grow if you first admit where you're lacking. So, be courageous. Say, I don't know. And maybe your legal pad will be filled with a lot more notes. And a few less unicorns.